I had been secretly in love with someone so far out of my league that even being near her felt like crossing a line. She was my best friend's older sister, stunning, powerful, untouchable. At his wedding, she pulled me aside and whispered words that turned my entire world upside down. The venue was breathtaking, filled with crystal chandeliers that shimmered like frozen waterfalls and endless arrangements of white roses. I adjusted my camera strap, took a steady breath, and reminded myself why I was there: to work, not to stare at her. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 27 years old, and I've spent the last 5 years working as a freelance event photographer. It isn't glamorous. Most nights are spent editing until 3 in the morning, surviving on instant ramen and black coffee, but I love it. Capturing moments that people want to hold on to forever feels like a kind of magic. This wedding was supposed to be just another job, but it became something I would never forget. My best friend, James Bennett, was getting married. We had been inseparable since college, sharing late night study sessions, road trips, and terrible karaoke. When he asked me to photograph his wedding, I agreed without hesitation, even though it meant seeing her again. Alex Bennett, James's older sister, was the woman I had been hopelessly in love with for 3 years. I first met her at James's graduation party. She arrived late, wearing a tailored black suit that probably cost more than 6 months of my rent. Her dark hair was pulled back, her green eyes scanning the room with quiet authority. She owned a global fashion empire, with offices in cities I had only dreamed of visiting. Meanwhile, I lived in a cramped apartment with a used car and a constant struggle to make ends meet. That night, though, we talked. We stood on the balcony and spoke about art, photography, and the things she wished she had time for. Her voice was smooth and low, and it stayed with me long after the party ended. I thought about that conversation for years. Now I stood at the wedding, camera in hand, trying not to notice her every time she entered a room. The morning unfolded in a blur of organized chaos. The estate was massive, surrounded by rolling hills, gardens, and a lake that mirrored the sky. I arrived early, setting up my equipment, and saw her almost immediately. She stood on the terrace, speaking on her phone, dressed in black, her hair falling in soft waves. She looked like something distant and untouchable, like art meant to be admired but never approached. I forced myself to focus on my work. Aperture, shutter speed, ISO, technical details that kept my thoughts from spiraling. The ceremony began in perfect golden light. James looked nervous but happy, and Sophie was radiant. I moved quietly, capturing moments as they unfolded, yet my attention kept drifting back to Alex. She sat in the front row, composed and unreadable, but her gaze kept finding me. Each time our eyes met, it lasted only a second before she looked away, leaving my hands trembling as I adjusted my lens. The reception was even more extravagant. Jazz music filled the air, champagne flowed freely, and the ballroom glowed with candlelight. I stood near the dessert table reviewing my shots when I felt her presence before I saw her. Her perfume, subtle and expensive, reached me first. When I looked up, she was standing close, her eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that stole my breath. She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper, and told me to come with her because she needed me that night. The world around me faded into noise. My mind searched for explanations, but none of them felt right. She turned and walked away without waiting for a response. Every logical instinct told me to stay where I was, to remember who she was and who I was, and how impossible this situation was. Still, I followed her. She led me out into the garden, where soft lights hung from trees and the air smelled of flowers and fresh grass. She stopped near a bench, her back to me, shoulders tense. For a moment, neither of us spoke. When she finally turned around, I saw something in her expression I had never seen before: vulnerability. She lit a cigarette, the brief flame illuminating her face, then looked at me and spoke quietly. She had noticed the way I looked at her. The words hit me like a shock, leaving me exposed and unable to hide. I tried to deny it, but she didn't let me. Her voice carried no anger, only a kind of sadness. I admitted what I had buried for years. I had been in love with her, convinced it was impossible, convinced she would never feel the same. She stepped closer, closing the space between us, and revealed that I wasn't the only one hiding something. She had noticed me too, had been looking for me in every room, had grown tired of pretending otherwise. Everything I believed about our worlds being separate began to crumble. Her hand touched my cheek, warm and gentle, grounding me in the moment. Fear and disbelief collided inside me. I told her I didn't belong in her world, that she deserved someone else. She stopped me firmly, refusing to let me decide that for her. She wanted something real, something she hadn't felt in years, and she believed I was that. The confession I had held back for so long finally spilled out, and before I could process anything further, she kissed me. It was soft at first, then deeper, filled with everything we had both kept hidden. My camera slipped from my hands, forgotten entirely. When we pulled apart, everything felt different, as though the world had shifted into something unrecognizable. For a moment, nothing else existed but us. Then reality returned: the wedding, the guests, James. The weight of it all settled heavily. She stepped back, her composure returning as doubt crept in. She called it a mistake, blamed the moment, the atmosphere, the champagne. The distance between us felt immediate and painful. I refused to let her retreat so easily. She had said she was tired of pretending, and I held on to that. She spoke of complications, our lives, our differences, her responsibilities, and the risk of everything falling apart. She believed people like her didn't get real, lasting happiness, only carefully arranged lives that looked perfect from the outside. I saw fear beneath her words and said it out loud. She resisted at first, but the truth lingered between us. I told her that even if it was complicated, even if it was frightening, it didn't change how we felt. I admitted my fear openly, but also my willingness to face it rather than walk away. She stood there torn between the safety she knew and the possibility of something real. The music drifted through the garden, soft and distant, as we faced each other in silence. She confessed that she didn't know how to do this, how to be open or vulnerable. I told her that it didn't need to be perfect, only honest. Something shifted in her expression then, a crack in the walls she had built so carefully. She looked at me, truly looked at me, and I saw the beginning of something neither of us could fully define yet. She said I had wanted to understand her because I found her interesting, and then admitted that she found me interesting too. Most people saw her as intimidating, and I agreed that she was, but I also saw the human side of her, and that was the part I liked the most. She shook her head at that, though a real smile spread across her face. She said I was going to be the death of her, saying my name like it meant something more. What we were doing felt fragile but also undeniable. We agreed to try to see where things might go, and not to run the moment things became difficult. She took a long moment before accepting, clearly weighing everything inside her, balancing fear against hope. In the end, she agreed, but only with one condition. We would take things slowly. We would figure out how to tell James together. And if at any point I felt overwhelmed by her world, her schedule, or the attention that came with her life, I would say so without guilt or obligation. I accepted without hesitation. The only thing that truly scared me was losing her before we even began. She reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, the softness of the gesture making my chest ache. We both knew we should return to the reception, but neither of us moved right away. Eventually, she went first, and I followed later, pretending I had been photographing the gardens instead of having a conversation that changed everything. The rest of the evening blurred together. I focused on my work, capturing the cake cutting, the first dance, and the toasts, but I remained aware of her the entire time. She moved through the crowd with ease, laughing and talking, appearing once again untouchable to everyone else. The difference now was that I knew the truth. She wasn't untouchable. She had simply learned how to appear that way. As the night wound down, guests began to leave. James and Sophie departed in a decorated car, heading off to begin their honeymoon. I stayed behind to pack my equipment while the venue staff started clearing everything away. As I carried a box toward my car, I heard footsteps behind me. She appeared beside me and insisted on helping. We loaded everything in silence, the parking lot nearly empty under dim streetlights. She offered to drive me home despite the distance, brushing off the inconvenience as if it meant nothing. The drive began quietly, filled with soft music and the steady rhythm of the road. Eventually we spoke, and she told me that she had first realized her feelings for me at one of James's birthday parties years ago. She remembered the way I told a story, how animated I was, how I made people laugh. While everyone else enjoyed the moment, she had been watching me. The idea that she had been paying attention to me all that time made my chest tighten. She admitted that she always noticed me, and that it made it hard to focus on anything else. As we drove through quieter streets, I asked if she had truly rescheduled her plans for me. She had already done it without hesitation. It was a simple act, but it meant more than she probably realized. At some point, I reached for her hand, and she let me hold it. She looked at our intertwined fingers with quiet surprise before smiling softly. The silence between us felt comfortable, no longer heavy or uncertain. She suddenly pulled over along a coastal road and stepped out of the car. I followed her to the edge where the ocean stretched into darkness, waves crashing far below. She told me she used to come there when everything in her life became too overwhelming. Standing beside her, I could feel the weight she carried. She admitted that I overwhelmed her now, but in a way that felt right. I made her want things she had long convinced herself she didn't need, simple things like quiet mornings, long conversations, and genuine connection. She spoke about wanting something real, something that felt like love, and the honesty in her voice made everything feel more real than ever. We stood there in the wind, both aware of how much this could change our lives. She draped her blazer over my shoulders when I shivered, the warmth lingering between us. We agreed to take things one step at a time, starting with something simple. We would meet the next day for coffee, with no expectations, just two people learning who the other truly was. When she drove me home, she offered to walk me upstairs. The building was modest, far from the world she was used to, but she didn't hesitate. By the time we reached my apartment, I felt self-conscious about the small space, but she didn't seem to notice any of that. Her attention was drawn to the photographs covering my walls. She moved through the room slowly, studying each image with care. She saw more than just pictures. She saw the stories behind them, the emotion captured in each frame. When she said that I didn't just take photos but told stories, something inside me warmed. We sat together, and for the first time, someone asked me why photography mattered to me. I told her about my mother, about the hospital, and how taking photos helped me hold on to who she really was during the hardest time in our lives. I told her how photography became a way to preserve meaning, to say that moments and people mattered. She listened quietly, holding my hand, and when I finished, she asked to hear more. I shared story after story, and somewhere along the way, the distance between us disappeared. We sat closer, more comfortable, more open. She admitted that despite all the grand events and powerful rooms she had been in, she had never felt as at ease as she did in my small apartment. We laughed together, even at something as simple as the sound of my leaking faucet. Then her expression shifted, and she told me about her past. Years earlier, she had been engaged to someone who seemed perfect, only to discover his betrayal. The experience had left her guarded, building walls to protect herself from ever feeling that kind of hurt again. She had chosen control over vulnerability, success over connection. Meeting me had changed something she hadn't expected. She said I saw her as a person rather than an opportunity, and it reminded her of what she had been missing. She admitted how tired she was of being alone, even when surrounded by people, and how exhausting it was to keep pretending she didn't want more. I told her to stop being afraid, not because it was easy, but because this moment mattered. She hesitated, still caught between caution and hope, but she didn't pull away when I leaned closer. Our second kiss was softer, slower, filled with intention rather than urgency. It felt like a choice rather than an accident. She stayed for a while after that. We sat together, talking quietly as the night faded into morning. It was simple and unremarkable in the best way, just two people sharing space without pressure or expectation. By the time the sky began to lighten, something between us had changed. We weren't just drawn to each other anymore. We understood each other. The next morning, sunlight filled my apartment as my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message appeared with a time and place for coffee, somewhere quiet and private. I stared at it, letting the reality of everything sink in. She had kissed me, stayed with me, and asked to see me again. I replied that I would be there, and almost immediately, another message came through saying she was looking forward to it. The hours that followed were filled with nervous energy as I tried to figure out what came next, knowing that whatever it was, it had already begun. I wondered whether people even still did casual coffee dates or if that kind of thing only existed in movies. In the end, I chose jeans and a simple white button-down, something that felt effortless without trying too hard. Magnolia Cafe sat quietly on a tucked, away street in the West Village, the kind of place easy to miss unless you already knew it was there. Inside, exposed brick walls and mismatched vintage furniture gave it a warm, intimate feeling. Only a few tables were occupied. Alex was already there, seated in a corner booth. She looked different, dark jeans, a soft cream sweater, no makeup, her hair tied back in a simple ponytail. She seemed younger, more relaxed, more real. When she saw me, her face lit up with a genuine smile. There was a hint of disbelief in her expression, as if part of her had expected this moment to disappear by morning. I felt the same, fully aware of how unexpected and overwhelming everything was, and yet I had come anyway. We ordered coffee, and for a moment, an awkward silence settled between us before it dissolved into shared laughter. The situation felt strange, almost surreal, sitting across from each other like this after everything that had happened the night before. Still, there was something comforting about it, something simple and grounding. She reached across the table and took my hand, and the tension eased. I made a quiet joke about the difference between our worlds, but she stopped me from reducing myself to numbers or comparisons. She spoke about my talent, about how I made people feel seen, and how that mattered more than anything else. It was difficult to fully accept, but I could tell she meant every word. We began opening up, slowly at first, then with more honesty. I admitted the fear that sometimes crept in when I looked at my own work, the lingering doubt that I might not be as good as people believed. She shared something deeper, something heavier, how lonely her life had been despite being surrounded by people. The weight of that loneliness sat quietly between us, and I felt it in the way she held my hand just a little tighter. We talked about what we wanted from life, not just from each other but from everything beyond this moment. I spoke about wanting to create something meaningful through my photography, to tell real stories and build a life that felt authentic. She listened carefully, then told me she saw me, truly saw me, and that was both comforting and terrifying at the same time. She explained why she had never said anything before, why she had kept her distance. From her perspective, I had always stood out, not because of status or success, but because of the way I saw the world and the way I saw her. Years ago, I had asked her something no one else had, whether she was happy, and that question had stayed with her ever since. We spent hours talking. The coffee went cold, forgotten as we shared pieces of our lives. She told me about growing up under constant pressure, about taking over her company at a young age, and about sacrificing normal experiences along the way. I told her about my own struggles, about choosing passion over stability, and the fear that came with that decision. At one point, she showed me a photo she had taken of me at the wedding. I was completely absorbed in my work, unaware of being watched. Seeing myself through her eyes was strange but also meaningful. She saw something in me that I often overlook. Then everything shifted again. My phone buzzed with an email that made my hands shake. A major photography magazine wanted to feature my work and discuss a possible book deal. It felt unreal, like too many good things happening at once. I struggled to process it, waiting for something to go wrong, but she gently reminded me that maybe I simply deserved it. Another message followed, this time from James, suggesting we meet for dinner soon. The reality of everything we were navigating crept back in, but she encouraged me to focus on the present moment. She wanted to celebrate, to mark this achievement properly, and her excitement for me made it impossible to refuse. We left the cafe hand in hand, and for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to believe that things could go right without a hidden cost. 3 months later, I stood in the same garden where everything had begun. My work had been published, the response overwhelming, and the book deal had become real. My life had changed in ways I had once only imagined, but the most important change stood beside me, her hand in mine, steady and certain. Those months had not been perfect. Our lives were different, and sometimes those differences showed. There were moments of awkwardness, moments of learning, moments where we had to figure out how to meet each other halfway. Still, we kept choosing each other. We eventually told James, and the conversation, while tense at first, turned out far better than expected. He had already noticed, already understood, and ultimately, he supported us. That acceptance lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. Now, at a charity event she had organized, I stood not just as a photographer but as her partner. She moved through the crowd with confidence, yet her attention always found its way back to me. In quiet moments, she reminded me without words that we were in this together. Later, she handed me a letter she had written. In it, she spoke about everything she had once believed she didn't need: connection, vulnerability, a life beyond achievement, and how that had changed. She wrote about wanting something real, something shared, something built together. Reading her words felt like seeing her heart laid bare. I told her I loved her, and this time there was no hesitation. The words came naturally, as though they had been waiting all along. She said she loved me too, and in that moment, everything felt certain. Life continued to move forward. My book was released, the tour took us across cities and countries, and she kept her promise to be there through all of it. We traveled together, experienced the world side by side, and built something that belonged to us alone. People often wondered how it worked, how two people from such different worlds could find common ground. The truth was simpler than that. We didn't try to force our worlds together. We created something new, something defined by shared moments, trust, and the decision to keep choosing each other. At my final book event, I spoke about seeing people for who they truly are, beyond expectations and appearances. As I looked at her in the crowd, I realized she had done the same for me. She had seen past my doubts and fears and helped me believe in something more. Later that night, walking through the city together, everything shifted once again. In a quiet moment away from the noise, she told me she wanted a future with me, a life built on everything we had started. I didn't hesitate. I chose her, the same way we had been choosing each other from the very beginning. She kissed me right there in the middle of the city, surrounded by movement and noise. Yet it felt like we were the only two people in the world. Two lives that had once seemed completely separate had come together to create something real, something worth every risk. And in that moment, nothing felt more certain than that.